Hello and welcome to another episode of the ExpertCPG Commerce podcast. My name is Ryan Flynn, the founder and CEO of ExpertCPG Commerce, where we help brands reach more customers on Amazon and beyond. And today I'm really excited to welcome to the show Ryan Moore, another Ryan from Modus Planning. And what Modus Planning is essentially the operating system that brands need to help them grow. And I'll let Ryan explain that better. He explains that much better than I just did. But essentially think about like demand planning, trade spend, trade promotion. A lot of when brands are getting into retail and different retail partners and distributors, and man, everything's tracked through spreadsheets. We talk a little bit about that, of just like how many brands still run, huge brands still run spreadsheets, and how Modus can, help with that. And also just Ryan's background in the industry, because he's seen a lot of interesting stuff and has some good words of wisdom and nuggets to share. And if you're a brand and you're wondering, hey, we're on Amazon, we want to be on Amazon, we don't know what we're doing, we don't know how to do it, we just don't have the resources. That's what we find a lot of brands that are growing, right? It's just like, yeah, we want to be doing more with Amazon, or Amazon's kind of working, but we don't know what we could be doing. So that's where we come in. That's where we can help. Just go to expertcpg.com. You connect with us there and find some resources. We have a couple white papers and some education we can provide you, and just give you a little bit more of what you could be doing on Amazon. And we actually do, for brands already on Amazon, we provide an audit where we can essentially not just tell you what you could be doing on Amazon, but actually show you, and brands get a ton of value from that. So again, expertcpg.com, and you connect with us there. All right, let's get on to the show today with Ryan Moore from Modus Planning. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, we're definitely excited to have you. So tell us a little bit, elevator pitch of what Modus does, and then we're going to go and come back to Modus, but then I want to go back into how you got started in this industry. So yeah, give us the lowdown.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, Modus Planning is, as you said, the operating system for how brands can plan their business and make sure that is being executed. So what that means is, brands have all of these different spreadsheets. They've got all of their different retailers that they're in, all of their products, their assortment. And, it's everyone has a different spreadsheet. It's all basically the same thing, but everyone's got a different format. It breaks. You have to go to lunch and come back, waiting for it to load and recalculate. Huge pain points. Experienced it myself. And so essentially, right, we take all that information, put it into a scalable web-based architecture called Modus Planning, where you can basically plan your bottoms-up build by retailer, map that through the underlying supply chain network that supports that retailer. And that allows operations and sales to coexist peacefully, which is no short order there, but really wanting to connect the dots between every aspect of the organization. So you plan that Publix BOGO, finance sees all the spend associated with that buy one, get one deal. Operations sees, okay, how much volume are we going to move through Publix because of that? And then all of that all of that volume is tracked through the distributor network supporting Publix, so that when those orders get placed, you can validate, yes, they're actually ordering correctly for this BOGO. As the way I thought about it was essentially a demand plan is not a guess. It's something where if you have the right information, you plug that information in, what you're going to sell at Publix. You have to make sure that the downstream supply chain partners are actually executing that deal, so that you actually do get that return on the very valuable trade spend that you need to get. So,
yeah.
Obviously there's a lot more to it than that, but as a high level view, we're all about efficiency. We're all about structure and really optimizing a brand's go-to-market.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a million questions more on all the things you just said, and we'll dive into some of that right here in a minute. Before we jump into your background and how you got started in the CPG industry, I just want to highlight, because you said something at the beginning about like spreadsheets. I think, and it's probably it's obviously better than it was 5 years ago. But again, it's amazing that the size of companies and probably the, complexity of companies of how much still runs on just, I don't want to say basic spreadsheets. They can get pretty complicated, obviously, with very complicated formulas, macros, whatever it may be, right? But it's kind of wild that, again, a lot of the commerce is still done just based on a bunch of spreadsheets, right?
Oh, absolutely. It does blow my mind. I mean, I've built these spreadsheets before I had a web-based system. And yeah, I think a big four accounting firm recently they came out with some statistic where it was like 95 or 98% of all the spreadsheets used in a business context contain errors. And so
Mm,
if I'm a brand and I know statistically that there's an error in the spreadsheet, my thought process goes to, okay, when is that error going to rear its head? And
yep.
how much is that going to cost me? And will that alienate me with the customer? Am I going to short that Publix BOGO? And
Yeah.
if you know anything about Publix, they don't like that. But so it's all about making sure that there is a structured approach. Now, again, spreadsheets are great for analyzing, right? For creating bespoke reporting and all of that. And so, we recognize that spreadsheets do have a place in business, right? You have to be able to use them as the tool that they are.
Yeah.
Are they an operating system? Are they something where you can give a macro enabled workbook with, all these different connections and all these macros
Hmm.
running in the background? Can you give that to like the new person on the team and expect them to run with it
Yep.
or learn it in 2 weeks before you go to another role? And so that's where Modus kind of comes in, right? By having that standard architecture, right? You can essentially future proof your brand. Like you don't have to worry about someone coming in and trying to figure out and backwards engineer this file. They can come in and say, hey, let me go through Modus University. Let me see, okay, how do I just click here in the data tab, select the data I want, click run, good, cool. So that's kind of our premise of, hey, not only are we scaling the data architecture and being
Hmm.
able to allow brands to add in new retailers, add in promotions, all of that, we're also scaling the internal data process side of things as well.
Yeah.
Because software just sitting in isolation doesn't do many people much good. It has to be
Right.
accompanied with a process. So
Yeah.
again, I can go off on this for quite some time, but to answer your question, yes, I have seen some, I call it abstract art. I have seen some serious abstract art in my day when it comes to the planning file. Oh yeah.
That's a good way to put it, abstract art. So yeah. All right. So tell us, yeah. I mean, you already can probably tell people just some first few minutes here, just listening to you and hearing you, like, you know a lot about the industry. How did you get started in the industry? Take us way back.
Yeah, way back in the glory days of the early 2010s, I got my first role in ice cream planning, so demand planning. So I was at Unilever, basically being that focal person, running the S&OP meetings, trying to herd the cats of, hey, what's going on in the sales world? What new deals are coming in? Which, where's the op? Where are the risks? And it's funny, the first brand I was put on to work on was the popsicle brand. The yellow
Mm,
boxes, everyone
yep.
loves them.
Yeah.
You know, and anyone that knows me is that tracks with this guy. Yeah, of course he'd be working on popsicles. This dude. But what was really wild about it, because this is my first foray into corporate America, first foray into supply chain, really trying to figure it all out. And they say that, hey, you're new in, you can come in with fresh eyes. And it's like, okay, well, yes, but, you just started. Are you really going to say, hey, this doesn't make any sense? No, you're
Right.
going to try to make the best of it and, do what you can. But what was interesting was like, we were learning about pallet programs at Kroger and stuff that was, just happening, right? The sales team was killing it, right? And I was learning about these events that were happening in like July or so. I was learning about them in like June, right? And so when you're working on popsicles and the supply chain in the summer is not incredibly flexible. So, I was like, okay, wow, how can we make sure that everyone's on the same page? And so that was a theme that
Mm,
kept coming up. And then also I've spent some time out in the factories as well. So I actually saw like the impact that it would have on people on the line, physically working on the line, say,
mm,
hey, now we have to work longer shifts, more shifts to try to rush to because this event or this plan needed to be revised. And so what's interesting about it is when people think of planning, they think, hey, planning, budgeting, etc. But there is a very demonstrable human cost to not planning the business well. Similarly, if you say, hey, my forecast accuracy isn't great, I'm just going to run, 120 days of supply on this item,
yep.
and then all that spoils out,
Yeah.
the environmental impact, the carbon impact, the impact to the bottom line can be tremendous. So I got really jazzed early in my career about, wait a second, planning, if you do this really right, the
Hmm.
doors that it unlocks for profitability, the doors that it unlocks for making sure the customer is delighted that you're in stock, on time, in full with fresh coated product,
Yep.
excellent. And so everything runs better if the plan is solid. And so I got really excited. I was, demand planning the Ben& Jerry's business, similar deal, trying to get all of the variables together. And so I love that role. But then I got the opportunity to then go to a startup. And so if you learn anything about me, it's that I really like startups and entrepreneurship. I just can't get enough of it, apparently. So this startup was Icelandic Provisions. And so Icelandic Provisions, I thought that, frozen was apparently too easy. I wanted more of a challenge. So I was like, all right, chill supply chain. Let's go with chill yogurt, perishable dairy. That's going to be a blast. And it was. It really was. So I went over to Icelandic Provisions, and essentially my boss that brought me in was like, all right, Ryan, we're going to create the best-in-class sales and operations planning infrastructure for a growing brand in existence. I'm like, all right, let's see how I can rise to that occasion. That's a tall order. Let's see how I do with that. And so obviously started off building a better spreadsheet. Can I build something that is really robust, really excellent?
Yeah.
And so again, got to that level, got to that granularity where it's like, all right, we're in this Whole Foods region that's mapped to this UNFI warehouse, right? All of that had to be very specific for my purposes of making sure I put the stock in the right spot. Meanwhile, on the other side of the WeWork, we had our trade planning and sales group. Similar situation, right? They bottoms up build spreadsheets, doing essentially the same architecture that I was doing on my bottoms up build. But of course, the systems weren't necessarily talking to each other. And so it was very clear, like, hey, there needs to be something to connect these dots and make it inextricable. And so we looked at demand planning softwares, something that says that you can use AI to generate a forecast for you, and the brand is less than a year old. It doesn't like the AI can't know that you just got into Wegmans or whatever it may be. You really have to get sales' buy-in to plug those details in, right? And so demand planning systems didn't give sales what they needed to align those incentives, and didn't give me what I needed. I needed somewhere to scale up bottoms up build. Then we looked at TPMs, right? Trade promotion management platforms. Now, these range from legacy systems that are essentially checkbooks where you can say, hey, we're going to accrue $1,000 for this ad, and this, that's what we're going to accrue. And if the forecast changes, or, if you accrue $10,000 for a TPR and your baseline's changed, the $10,000, you have to manually revise it. That's no go. And then essentially, right, you have TPMs that are checkbooks, or you have TPMs that are just focused on sales planning and don't extend upstream to the distributors, or especially distributor ship tos, which I'll touch on in a second here, and then back to where you ship from. So I couldn't get any of the supply chain insights I needed to actually execute against the trade plan in a pure play TPM. And so this is back in 2016. And, we were like, okay, we're asking peers in the industry. They're just saying spreadsheet, Google Sheet, Google Doc. And so I call up my co-founder that I was friends with in school, and he's been doing full stack development since he, probably could read. I mean, the guy is awesome. And so Miles is probably he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I'm like, hey man, this really feels like there needs to be a standard approach for doing this type of planning. Let's try to build it. And so our first iteration, so Icelandic was like, yeah, man, absolutely. Like we feel like this could be, something that could be helpful. And so we got cracking, and, I project managed it right with Miles, try to build it out. And the first iteration of Modus Planning, and of course we're called Modus because we want to be the MO for how brands go to market, right? Modus operandi. But the first working title was Variable-Based Demand Planning, short BBDP.
Yeah, doesn't roll off the tongue.
Yeah, not the best branding ever. So we left that behind. But essentially it was that. It was the bottoms up build, then layering on trade promotion management, and then spent 5.5 years with Icelandic Provisions, building, growing, Modus and Icelandic Provisions. And then I was able to go full time in 2021 with Modus. And so really, bootstrapping this thing, I got married in 2018. Everything I got from friends and family went to Modus.
Right in the
I wouldn't
business,
have it
right?
any other way. Wouldn't
Yeah.
have it any other way. And now we now support well over 50 brands on the platform, touching everything from sales, ops, finance. Everyone's planning on one source of truth. So really, grateful for what we've been able to do and the opportunity to build,
Mhm.
what we've been able to build. And I just know that, as we continue to evolve the platform, it's just going to consistently get better and better. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. I love the startup story, the startup hustle, the just building it and fight. All businesses come out of a problem typically, right? They need to solve a problem, and definitely there's a need for what you've built with Modus. So let's talk about when does it make sense? Because I mean, I've seen it, in this business, my expert CPG commerce, and I'm sure you see it in your own business, running your business. Like when you are building a business, you're growing a business, you kind of get blinders on some things, and you just forget, and go back to a CPG angle, right? Like you just kind of forget any product based business. Oh yeah, we have been building this in spreadsheets for the past 3 years, and like it's slowly just morphed into other things, and you've added stuff on, you've tore it down and rebuilt it. But then, I guess my question is, when does it make sense for a brand to look at some kind of demand planning software, or I guess in general, because you would see it from your experience with isolating provisions, just the brands you work with, like when do brands have to start getting sophisticated on this stuff?
That's a great question. I mean, there are a number of schools of thought. For me personally, if I was starting a brand, I had sales and I was on shelf, it is so much easier to just start in Modus and build
Mhm.
from there than it is to get 5, 10 years in and try to migrate everything over. And then,
Yeah.
you've lost a lot of data with regard to how your trade promotions have performed in the past. So you can't use that data for optimizing for the future, all of that. So, generally speaking, and of course, like we're structured to support startups, right?
Yep.
As well. But really people that are serious about making sure that they have a solution that will last them from 0 or 5 million up to 50 to 100 to 200 to 500 and
Yep.
beyond, right? And having that single source of truth is really key. So if that's something that is important to people, if they don't want to have to build these spreadsheets and then
Mhm.
manage users, or say, oh wait, are you editing it, are you editing it, if you have multiple people coming in as well and something that's truly cross functional, absolutely. So I would say, we do have brands that are, 5, 10 million that are on Modus that are basically starting really right.
Mhm.
And, we have brands that are upwards of 500 million to a billion. So there is quite the gamut there. But that's why we built this thing, is so that it could scale
Yeah.
with brands. But I'd say, by the time you reach $20 million in revenue, you're going to start to see, hey, what's my trade rate at Publix? What's my trade rate at
Yep.
HEB? If you have trouble answering questions like your trade rates, like understanding your trade rates, if you have trouble understanding, how much volume should go on the West Coast or the East Coast, or how much should you produce by SKU, if you don't have confidence in those numbers, I would say it is definitely time to really think about software. Now the thing is, it's, I've seen brands that before they even start shipping cases, they've got NetSuite, they've got, ADI set up, right?
Yep.
They're just cranking because they've seen that movie before of, oh wait, orders are coming in, I can't
Yeah, we need
manually put them in, and it's a problem. So there's different schools of thought for sure, but I'm always about, and again, it it makes sense that I would want this to be the case, right? But I do believe that, if brands want that solid foundation from the jump, you should basically go for it, because it will pay dividends, because you won't be able to know how much you would have missed in spoilage or shorts
Yeah.
or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I'm sure, you're aiming for high growth, right? Whether they have outside funding or not, but also if you've got like people on the team who have been there before, right? Maybe some veterans in the industry, or maybe done this with a brand or two, and they probably know as well, okay, we need something like this. So this is what we're starting with, right? And it's sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So when it's, that first time founder who's created that cold chain product, or, whatever it may be, like, right. And they just, I think we're gonna build a Salisbury as we're flying it kind of thing, then it's a little harder there. But I get where you're coming from. It makes sense to start as soon as you can. And I'm sure kind of one of the next question is I'm sure everybody along the supply chain loves it, right? Because I mean, it's probably the brand sees the benefit, but then everybody sees the benefit, right? You got everything from all your partners, whether it be co-packers and supply chain and distributors, whatever it may be. Everybody probably loves having the right data at the right time. I'm sure buyers love it, right? That kind of thing. So I'm sure you see that kind of results from it as well, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think just dialing in, because something that I think differentiates Modus a lot and was born from a very deep necessity of mine back in the day was making sure that when the orders get cut from the UNFIs, the KHEs, the CNSs of the world, and even direct accounts too. I've got some stories there, but when those orders get cut and they're not ample to fill a promotion because that promotion didn't make it to the replenishment buyer's desk. I mean, that
Yep.
is endemic, right? Like we see that
Yep.
across the board. And so for me, it's you can't even come close to optimizing trade spend unless you know that you sold what you could have sold because the distributor had it in stock and made sure the shelves were full. And
Yeah.
so for us, you plan those trade promos in Modus, that then feeds to the retailer. And then, of course, right, that volume goes out to the supply chain network. So when KHE in Chino, California, that site places an order, you can say, hey, is this enough for Chino, or is it going to result in spoilage because KHE's guarantee to Sprouts is X, and we're going to spoil out before they ship through because they accidentally added a zero to the order or whatever it may be. And so when you have that infrastructure set up and the brand is using Modus to validate orders and say, hey, are we going to spoil out? Are we going to go out of stock? Right. But they can make sure that they really nail that on every line item on those POs. Category managers are very happy that you're always in stock, and you can punch above your weight because hey, I can fill the demand and I can manage my distributor partners. And then, of course, right, with the trade promotions, you have really strong line of sight into the retailer margins, right? So does this event structure give the retailer the margin requirements that they need? And so really being able to have line of sight into that. And then similarly, right, just it all rolls together because not only do we validate the inventory at the customer, but we do that also for the brand's warehouses. So do they have enough to fill these orders?
Yeah.
Crazy order came in for some sort of MCB forward buy or whatever it may be. We can see that in a second and say, hey, there is risk on these SKUs. Can we negotiate the order? Or can we somehow reshift and sort product from one order to another order? So really making sure that you have line of sight into when that plan changes, and it will most definitely change.
Yeah.
Aberrant stuff happens all the time. For me, I don't want to, I want to focus on both predicting what's going on really well, but when
Mhm.
things happen that are aberrant, or in the example of forward buys or bridge buying or whatever it may be, we want to give brands the tools they need to react as quickly as possible
Mhm.
to those aberrant events, which I think is really important because any supply chain system that says, oh, here's your plan, it's going to happen, no worries, hasn't ever had to manufacture, hasn't had to have a co-manufacturer in a blizzard. So all these things
I
happen.
was gonna say that, you were talking about that earlier. I was thinking like all the natural. You're talking about your background and yeah, with popsicles and ice cream, and I was thinking about like, natural. I mean, there's so many variables that, like, I mean, and you were dealing with frozen. There's so many factors, and then you add something like an act of God or some whatever it may be, right? It's like you can't plan for that stuff, but you need to react to it, right? And you need to, if you there's no spreadsheet model that probably can, help you with that. But if you have a clear picture of everything and it's close to real time and everything like that, then you can know, hey, this is how we can react to it. And like speed is such a, I think, underutilized thing in business is how quickly you can react to things. And that's why you always see the small startups start to, take on the big incumbents in the space because they can just move so much faster and those kind of things. So, yeah.
It's very true. And from a software perspective, we're not having 2-hour meetings on button gradients. We're having those meetings
That's true.
on, hey, how can we get this feature out perfectly for this
Mhm.
brand? Because, how can we add this flexibility, this automation, this,
Mhm.
this advanced model, whatever it may be. And so we really do try to move incredibly fast, but also with the understanding that speed has to come with quality. in the software, right? Similarly to CPG, right? The parallels are actually pretty wild where, if you go and you really try to rip through some code and push something live quickly and you
Yeah.
don't test it, that's not going to be good for anyone. Same thing with product development on the CPG side of things. So we really try to make sure we balance that speed with quality always. But you mentioned something interesting, right? With acts of God, right? I mean, we saw a lot of traction. And again, we've growing mostly word of mouth and all of that. We're starting to, try to get some Google ads going and stuff like that. Sure. But back in 2020, we saw some traction after COVID because
Yeah.
the statistical models and the AI algorithms had no idea what to do with it because they saw all these spikes.
Mhm.
And as a demand planner, you have people in sales who are like, oh my gosh, we're going to see this continue. And it's like, all right, well, let's chill. Let's hang tight here. Let's see how this develops because, that huge spike in March, right, might not continue, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's all about making sure you have you have really strong reactivity, but it's based in trended fact, right? Hey, here's what the consumption is. It's not necessarily what distributors are ordering because distributor orders don't equal consumption of your product. So it's all about ground truth, getting everyone on the same page with, okay, here's how the sales are developing. Okay, we have that established pattern. All right, now let's update the forecast versus, not having that fact there. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, COVID was definitely somebody never didn't have that on a bingo card. Of cares this global pandemic is gonna affect everything. So,
yeah,
talk to us. I mean, a big part of COVID was e-com, right? And obviously, here at Expert CPG, we deal a ton with Amazon and help our clients with Amazon. And traditionally, our clients, Amazon's not their primary channel, right? They're selling in retail, brick and mortar, distributors, D2C, everything. So, talk to me about how demand planning, like e-com, affects that because obviously on Amazon in particular, you've got like the vendor side, right? Which is,
mhm.
or then you've got more on the seller side where it's a lot more control. But then it's not as maybe predictable, or it is, but like you control a lot more of it, I guess is what I'm saying. So then you got D2C, someone's own site. Let's talk about like those things and how those can, I guess, play into, or even, I don't want to say like harm demand planning, or like just add some wrinkles into it, or do they? What's your opinion there?
Yeah. So almost all of our clients are omni-channel. That is, I think, table stakes for most people, especially non-perishables. And so we always encourage brands to make sure they bring in their Shopify, their Amazon forecast into Modus, right? So we want to make sure that, there's also things such as price matching where we can dynamically add pricing changes over time. But, I think there's a couple of aspects, right? Because, oftentimes, if you're managing the inventory at the Amazon warehouse, and you say, hey, we have this type of, promotion or Google ad or whatever, and we're going to fund more. If you know the ROAS on that event, right, you can then back into the lift that's going to drive. And so essentially, it's not too dissimilar from how we model brick and mortar with regard to units per store per week. But in this case, the store is just one giant Amazon warehouse. And then you have a rate of sales on that, and then there
Yeah.
is associated with it. Now, where it gets particularly challenging is if Amazon is placing the replenishment orders, their algorithm is difficult. I think you would know better than most in terms of how they actually mechanically place those orders. However, we have seen that oftentimes those orders do regress to the consumption that's planned in Modus. So as long as you understand a weeks on hand threshold based on their ordering history,
Mhm.
you can have pretty strong confidence to where you're going to end the year at with Amazon. Um, yeah, does that make sense generally?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And what about like on the seller? I don't know if you see any brands that sell direct on the seller side themselves. Like, how does that play into it when they're controlling how much they're sending in or not sending in? I guess I should say. Are you just looking at more historical sales? Like, yeah, we joked before we started recording, less than a year and trying to predict like what your, forward looking is going to be. And it's everything's so seasonal, so difficult for that. So, any, I guess, tips or tricks there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have, we can load in all of this data, right, to understand, okay, what has the average weekly run rate been in the past? And you can
Yeah.
set this, right? 12 weeks, 24 weeks, whatever it may be. And so using more recent especially if you're a growing brand, right? You need to use essentially that recent history to really inform, okay, what should this be in the future? And then, of course, once you have that baseline, then you can layer in seasonality multipliers on top of that throughout the year if you are a seasonal business, right? Even to the week, right? 4th of July, Christmas, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And so with that, being able to review, okay, what's been that trailing 12-week, 24-week average, you can then get a good sense of, okay, what are the orders going to be? And if you do have to manage a D2C fulfillment warehouse independently, that is done in Modus because you can essentially have each of those sites tied to the fulfilling distribution center. So what we do is say, hey, Amazon is not only a fulfilling distribution center to the consumer, but it's also an inbound warehouse that you're managing, right? Or maybe it's some sort of e-com partner, right, that you're managing. So we would set it up like that, where we would say, all right, you're going to need 60 cases, or if you want to maintain 30 days on hand of this warehouse, that's going to equal 90 cases of SKUs A, B, and C. You can basically figure that out pretty quick. And of course, again, if these orders come back and they are way over, you can react to it. You can see your days on hand drop. You can see your projected inventory levels a month, 2 months, whatever it may be. You can see those drop to zero and say, hey, I've got to add more stock ASAP, and then react to it. Because, someone drops a TikTok that's viral.
Yeah.
All bets are off, right?
I was just going to say, like, those kind of things, right? You got, like, all of a sudden it just catches fire and it blows up. Or, you even got, like, things that, brands try to plan for. There's 2 Prime Days every year now, right? There's one in July, typically one in October. And we see our clients have, easily 2.5 times spikes on those days of sales. And if you don't plan right for that downstream, right, and have inventory, you may have all the inventory there to fulfill those orders, but all of a sudden you're very short then for the next, a month or two, or whatever it may be. So yeah, all adds to the complexity, and it all, as you said, that's why you need something like Modus, where there's so many variables and factors, all these different channels. You got to have some kind of central source of truth. I love using that phrase in our business, just to think the source of truth, to have that. So as we wrap up here, Ryan, give us maybe, I don't know, just words of advice for brands who are at that growing stage, who kind of need, I guess, I don't know, what would you say to them as they look just to the demand plan, whether they're using a tool like Modus or not? From your experience, your expertise, any kind of advice or, words of encouragement, I was going to say, but to help them navigate the ever-changing world of like retail and getting the, product on the shelf and into customers' hands.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first off, there's very few things that I think are more fulfilling than seeing a product that you've thought through, that you've worked on, that you have, there's so many hurdles in the way between, hey, I want to make this product, formulating it, distribution, getting it accepted, getting it on the shelf. So many hurdles. And so many people trying to do it. It is, when you see it on the shelf, that is a feeling that is unlike any other, right?
Yeah.
And, I haven't necessarily been a founder in the CPG space, but I'm just working on these products, and it's awesome. I mean, seeing the look on founders' faces when, they hit their number, it's incredible. So first off, that is a huge piece of encouragement. It is awesome. It is an excellent industry, always changing, always fun, evergreen, because everyone's got to eat. But the other thing is, I would say that in order to compete, you've got to do the work. You've got to understand your business better than you understand yourself. You have to get all up in the weeds of it. And what that means is, for example, unit economics, input costs, understanding how all of your inputs are changing, how your contracts work, what have you locked in, what are your lead times for raw materials? Do you have to spend more money, to get better pricing on a per unit basis? Can you do that, right? Just get really in the weeds on your cost of goods, your unit economics. That includes transportation COGS, right? And product COGS. Then on the sales side, doing the work to understand the trade spend, second largest line item on the brand's P&L behind the cost of goods sold. Massive driver of your future in terms of getting on the shelf, right? With slotting fees and making sure the retailer margin is correct, make sure you have the right support to drive the trial and repeat that you can get. And so trade is a huge cost bucket, but a huge driver of your brand's future success. And so in planning trade, I've seen brands say, let's just do a flat line, 20% of our anticipated gross, do the work, get down to the event level. What do you have planned? How much is that going to cost? What's your trade rate by unit? What's your contribution margin by unit, right? So with all of that, you can then say, okay, this event, and this is a success story, right? We identified that a 4 for $5 at $1.25 per unit and a 2 for $3 at $1.50 per unit basically performed the same. But the 2 for $3 was about 60% more efficient on a trade cost per incremental unit perspective than the 4 for $5. And so don't do 4 for $5s, focus in on those 2 for $3s, generally speaking, right? Of course, there's a number of different factors that may influence that decision, but doing the work to understand those numbers and getting down to that nitty gritty, getting those contracts from your broker, plugging them into wherever, but really getting it to that event level is absolutely key. And then just generally speaking, right, understanding your consumer too. The brands that I have seen the most success with understand their consumer so incredibly well. What's driving that purchase decision? How did that brand get in front of that consumer? Understanding all of the drivers that led to the consumer to making that purchase decision, and then making sure that they keep that consumer in the loop. And, because I think it takes about 11 touch points before a consumer realizes that your brand even exists. So really understanding, okay, what is working? And then getting to a point where you can say, hey, if we invest X, we're going to get Y in return, right? Same thing with my business too, right? Same thing with software. It's a very similar vibe, but really understanding the why behind that purchase decision is huge. And I've seen brands, if they get to that level, they're very successful because they know what's working and they can either, double down on that, or they know it's not working and they can pivot away from that. They can make packaging better, right? They can make shelf position better. They can increase their online presence. Anyway, so those are some words of wisdom that I've seen. But the last thing I will add though is no one will care as much about your brand as you do. No one. So your distributor that you just signed up with these massive programs with, they'll place orders that are algorithmically driven. It is up to you to make sure that they are correct, and it's just a fact of life. Is that the way it should be? Probably not, but holistic, full ownership of the number, that's the way you're going to succeed, because the brands that do win do that. So anyway, that's my...
That's a great piece of advice. Any entrepreneur should hear that, because you're right. Everybody thinks what they do is it's like, oh, we're changing the world here, right? And it's just like, to somebody else, you're just kind of a cog in their wheel, not in a bad way, right? But you're just like a part of their process or whatever what they're putting in their mouth, whatever it is. So yeah, it's a great piece of advice that I think you all need to be reminded of every now and then. So Ryan, last but not least, just tell us where people can connect with you and or find out more about Modus.
Absolutely. So modusplanning.com, that's where we are. LinkedIn also are really working on making sure that, I kind of, when these pearls of wisdom bubble up, oftentimes, when I'm just like on a walk around the park and I'm like, wait a second, that's some good trade promotion advice, so I'm trying to get into a groove of putting that on LinkedIn and, creating webinars with industry leaders, not too unlike yourself, Ryan. But yeah, we're on LinkedIn, Ryan Moore, Modus Planning. And so it's Modus, MODUS, like modus operandi. What's your MO, But that's the thought behind the brand. Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Ryan, thanks for, first of all, tell us all about Modus, sharing your wisdom also with the audience today. Lots of great little nuggets in there. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ryan. This is a blast.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
All right. What a great episode today with Ryan Moore from Modus Planning. Thanks so much to Ryan for coming on the show and sharing a little bit more about what Modus does and just sharing some of his wisdom as nuggets of information that he can share with our audience. And hopefully you got a little bit out of that. And if you did, even if you didn't, the biggest way we can help grow this podcast, reach more people, is if you just engage with us, whatever platform you're on. Please subscribe, leave a review, thumbs up, whatever you're watching or listening to this on. It really helps us grow the podcast. Send the link to a friend and they may get something out of it as well. And we will see you next time on the next episode of the Expert CPG Commerce podcast.